Scene 1, interior. An office space. Fluorescent, bare. The year is 2035, and neurotechnology is the new normal. An employee sits at their desk. They're wearing earbuds that their workplace has issued them. But these earbuds are doing much more than playing music, because they have brain sensors embedded inside them.
It's also tracking their stress levels while they're interacting with their screen and typing a memo. And then they're sitting back, relaxing, and they're reviewing their brain data over the past couple of months. And they notice that there's something unusual going on when they're sleeping. And so they pull up a new email, type it through their brain sensing earbuds, and they send off a quick message to their doctor and say, like, hey, notice that there's something unusual going on here. Could you take a look and let me know what you think?
There are no physical screens or keyboards here, only desks where the workers sit and stare straight ahead, clicking around office software with their minds. Our worker is sitting with her arms folded at a desk. As she waits for her doctor to respond, her thoughts wander.
She starts to fantasize about one of her colleagues and then suddenly starts to worry, realizing that her employer has access to all of her brain data. And she notices that a little message pops up on her screen warning about inter-office romances, and she doesn't want to get in trouble in that context. She's relieved when later in the day she gets an email from her boss that tells her that she's getting a performance bonus, and the reason is her brain metrics show that she's really just been on it. She leaves work. She's still jamming to the music with her brain-sensing earbuds in. Playlists will become increasingly responsive to brain activity. That's kind of a given. She gets home, has her brain-sensing earbuds in. While she sleeps at night, that allows her to track brain activity during the night. It also potentially could allow people to do things like market to her while she's sleeping. And then she comes into work the next day. There's a somber cloud that's fallen over the office, and the reason is that one of her colleagues has been arrested under suspicion of engaging in some kind of fraud. And she's really worried because she's been secretly working with that person on a startup. But it turns out that as you work more closely with someone, you can start to see synchronization of brain data between two people. And she's worried that that synchronization data is going to be used by the authorities to implicate her in his wrongdoings.
A world overrun by neurotechnology. It all sounds very sci-fi. But our guest today, Nita Farahany, says that many of our devices already have these sensing capabilities. And this kind of workplace experience is just within reach.
There's already workplaces that are issuing these earbuds that have brain sensing devices in them. Could really both benefit and be used by an individual and be used against them.
I'm Bilawal Sidhu, and this is the TED AI Show, where we figure out how to live and thrive in a world where AI is changing everything. Hi, I'm Bilawal Sidhu, host of TED's newest podcast, the TED AI Show, where I talk with the world's leading experts, artists, journalists to help you live and thrive in a world where AI is changing everything. I'm stoked to be working with IBM, our official sponsor for this episode. In a recent report published by the IBM Institute of Business Value, among those surveyed, 1 in 3 companies pause an AI use case after the pilot phase. And we've all been there, right? You get hyped about the possibilities of AI, spin up a bunch of these pilot projects, and then crickets. Those pilots are trapped in silos, your resources are exhausted, and scaling feels daunting. What if, instead of hundreds of pilots, you had a holistic strategy that's built to scale? That's what IBM can help with. They have 65,000 consultants with generative AI expertise who can help you design, integrate, and optimize AI solutions. Learn more at ibm.com/consulting. Because using AI is cool, but scaling AI across your business, that's the next level.
Boring docs with walls of text are bad for business. Our brains are wired to react to visuals. So make your docs visual with Canva Docs. Grab attention by adding any type of media to your Canva doc. Photos, charts, graphics, videos, banners, and much more. Bye-bye, boring docs. You'll love the docs you can easily design with Canva, and your readers will too. Love your work with Canva Docs at canva.com. Teams with big ideas start in Jira, the only project management tool you need to plan and track work across any team. Jira even helps our team here at TED, keeping us in sync to deliver the big ideas our listeners love. And there's a lot more that teams will love about Jira. It keeps cross-functional tasks organized with a project's timeline. That's always really key so that we make our deadlines. And cross-functional teams like TED working in one tool gives leaders the important visibility they need to make better business decisions. Get started on your next big idea today in Jira.
Hey listeners, I'm excited to share with you a podcast I think you'll love called The Next Wave. This show brings you fresh takes, industry insights, and a trustworthy perspective on how to implement AI to grow your business. Matt Wolf and Nathan Lands, the hosts of the show, do a great job of democratizing the expertise that is often reserved for the boardrooms of the biggest corporations out there and bringing that directly to you. Whether you're seeking to adapt your company to the AI era or simply curious about the future, this podcast will equip you with the knowledge to thrive in the forthcoming wave of change. Plus, I think you're going to enjoy the episode where I joined as a guest called Why Google Search Isn't Going Anywhere Anytime Soon. Check out The Next Wave wherever you get your podcasts. Today, we're going to dive into AI-enhanced neurotechnology with ethicist and legal scholar Nita Farahany. Nita is the author of The Battle for Your Brain, Defending the Right to Think Freely in the Age of Neurotechnology, a book I found both fascinating and terrifying. It's about how neurotechnology, without regulation, has the power to infringe upon our last bastion of privacy, our privacy of thought. But is this kind of technology inevitable? And if so, how do we preserve our cognitive liberty? A term that Nita has used that I find myself thinking about a lot lately. I followed up with Nita because I had so many questions. Nita, welcome to the TED AI Show.
Thanks for having me.
First, I have to ask, can you start by giving us a brief overview of neurotechnology?
Sure.
What it is, how does it work at a high level, and what are some of the dominant use cases that companies are pursuing?
Up until now, if somebody hears neurotechnology, they associate it with maybe something like what Elon Musk is doing, which is with his Neuralink company, drilling a small, hole into the skull, implanting electrodes deep into the brain, and then enabling somebody who maybe has lost the ability to communicate or has lost the ability to move to regain some of that functionality. That is also neurotechnology, but it is not the neurotechnology that's going to impact most of us. What I'm focused on is the Internet of Things and wearable technology. So the fact that, people are increasingly wearing devices like a smartwatch or earbuds or XR devices like a virtual reality and augmented reality glasses that are packed with sensors. And those sensors are picking up different aspects of our bodily function. Anytime you think, anytime you do anything, neurons are firing in your brain. They give off tiny electrical discharge. Hundreds of thousands of neurons may be firing at any given moment that reflect different mental states. So when you're happy, when you're sad, when your mind is wandering, or when you think up, down, left, right, and you want to navigate around a screen, those are electrical signals that can be picked up by these sensors, and then AI enables the decoding of that into commands. Most people are used to, for example, heart rate or the number of steps that they're taking, or even temperature being something that's tracked. And what's already on the market, but starting to come in a much more widespread fashion, is embedding brain sensors into those devices, mostly electroencephalography sensors, EEG sensors. And those sensors can be put into earbuds or headphones or even small wearable tattoos behind the ear that pick up electrical activity in the brain. And so really the way to think about neurotechnology is not some separate device, although there are many of those that already exist on the marketplace, like a forehead band or sensors that can be put into a hard hat, but instead to think about our wearable devices we're already wearing with new sensors that have the capability of picking up brain activity.
Even recently with the release of the Apple Vision Pro or the Meta Quest 3, the way I've been thinking about it is on one hand, it's a VR headset. On the other hand, it's a biometric recorder on your face.
That's right.
What is currently possible with this technology as far as mind reading goes, and what is not quite possible yet, but is on the near horizon?
Yeah, it's a good question. XR is in many ways from the ground up new technology, right? So it's computing on your face, but it doesn't have to be constrained by the same old rules. And the same old rules being something like a keyboard and a mouse or a joystick, like that doesn't have to be how we navigate through that. And so as you build a new class of technology, it's possible to reimagine what interacting with that technology looks like. And so that's what these companies have done is they've packed them full of biometric sensors that, whether those are cameras or facial recognition or eye gaze or brain sensors, all of them are being trained on the ability to be able to make inferences about brain and mental state. So are you happy? Are you sad? Are you tired? Are you awake? Is your mind wandering or are you paying attention? Some of these kind of basic emotional states. Also, most of them are pretty good at being trained on brain activity to figure out cursor activity. So up, down, left, right. So a lot of the things that you could do with your mouse, you could do with a brain-computer interface device. And then they're getting better at being able to decode an intention to type. What's not there yet from a true mind-reading capacity for wearable devices is literally what you're thinking or continuous language in your brain. So you can't quite at this point think, oh, I need to send a quick text message to my husband and then have that somehow decoded from your brain, sent to your mobile device, and then sending off a message to him by thinking about doing so. But that's coming. So that's the kind of thing where the intention to communicate is something that can increasingly be decoded by these devices. And that's where generative AI really can be a game changer, because generative AI trained on natural language and conversations becomes much more powerful at being able to predict the next word that it is that you want to type. And so that kind of autocomplete feature of generative AI paired together with brain activity and the increasing capability of being able to put large language models on a device mean that the devices and the brain sensors can co-evolve with the individual so that it becomes increasingly more precise at more and more mind reading.
It's really powerful. So it sounds like this technology can kind of coarsely infer your brain states, not exactly read your internal monologue, but to your point, as you introduce new modalities, you're looking at what does the camera feed see? What is what is the user's eye gaze focused on? And then throw in generative AI to throw a layer of prediction on top of that. Even with these very coarse sensing capabilities, you can actually start making very accurate predictions.
That's right.
So I want to understand, why is this something so many companies are racing towards and investing in heavily? What are some of the most positive use cases that you're excited about? Like, how is this actually going to help users?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways it can help users. And I don't think about neurotechnology as just those brain sensors that are put into an earbud. I think about this as an entire class of cognitive biometrics, which allow predictions about what a person is thinking and feeling. And that can have a lot of really positive use cases the more we can actually gain really accurate insights about what's happening inside of our brains. So the companies who are racing to this space are all of the major tech companies, right? Apple has all kinds of patents and investments in this space. And you see the same thing at Meta and Google and others, because if XR technology really takes off, which I think eventually it will, it doesn't make sense to have it powered or have us tethered to a keyboard and a mouse or a joystick. Like, there has to be a more natural and seamless way of interacting with these devices. The approach has not been like, let's figure out how to commodify all the brain data, but it's like, how do we build a new class of technology from the ground up and have a new way of thinking about interacting with that technology? But then, there's also a huge amount of investment that's been happening to the side, which is on mental health and recognizing that the brain is an untapped potential of areas and products that could be targeted at mental health. And so, this is things like seeing a huge number of apps that are focused on whether it's AI-based mental health or if it's journaling or meditation apps. There, you have, a billions to trillions of dollar industry potentially around brain health and wellness. And then they start to converge, because suddenly, if you have this new class of devices that have been focusing on neural interface and you have this untapped potential of brain health and wellness, suddenly you have access to much better insights and much better ways of being able to actually interact with the brain and to gather data that could be used for much more targeted products. So I think it's like the biggest untapped market, if you think of it that way.
That's well said. I mean, I believe Zuckerberg called neural interfaces the holy grail of VR, right?
That's right. Yeah. The QWERTY keyboard doesn't make any sense when you're thinking about like XR, right?
Right,
It just doesn't make sense. Nor does the mouse, right? I mean, it's
Totally.
like it's become second nature to us, but the idea that I have to work on a mouse to navigate around my screen, like touch screen was a good innovation that way, but that's still awkward.
Yeah.
And like we're inefficient in our interactions with technology.
Support for this show comes from LinkedIn. If you are a B2B marketer, you know how noisy the ad space can be. A lot of noise. If your message isn't targeted to the right audience, it'll just disappear. But with LinkedIn ads, you can be a lot more precise. You can reach the professionals who are more likely to find your ad relevant, because LinkedIn has targeting capabilities to help you reach folks by job title, industry, company, and more. You can stand out with LinkedIn ads and start converting your B2B audience into high quality leads right away. I've learned so much about the vastness of LinkedIn because it does seem like everybody is on there. So it's helping me find some leads or think of connections that I wouldn't have otherwise thought of without the technology. It's helping me stay informed and stay educated. Start converting your B2B audience into high quality leads today. We will even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Go to linkedin.com/TEDaudio to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/TEDaudio. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
This world you painted sounds very efficient, if that's the right word for it, but there is something uncanny about it, right? And I want to get into what makes it uncanny. In evaluating some of the risks of this technology, you brought a lot of awareness to this idea of cognitive liberty. So how do you define cognitive liberty, and why do you find it to be a useful term when you're looking at this new wave of neurotechnology?
I came on the term cognitive liberty around 2010 or something, and it resonates with me well because what it reflects from my perspective is this right to self-determination over our brain and mental experiences as a fundamental matter. And like, what does that even mean to have self-determination? There's this huge amount of literature that has developed over the past couple of decades around what self-determination means and why self-determination is fundamental to human self-actualization. You need the basic autonomy, the competence, and the capacity for relatedness to other people. And so for me, it's about that. It's about those pillars of self-determination, the ways in which technology can both enable it, but also have increasingly come to interfere with the capacity for self-determination, and how cognitive liberty would give us the goalpost to say, like, what is it that we're trying to achieve in technological design or in technological regulation? We're trying to preserve this space of self-determination for individuals to enable them to form their identity, to have a space of mental privacy, to have the capacity of freedom of thought, the preconditions to be able to become a fully self-actualized human. So it resonates really well for me as a liberty interest, as a kind of fundamental right that individuals have as a precondition to being able to flourish.
It's like our minds are this sanctum sanctorum, right? We feel like we have complete dominion over it, though already technology is influencing us at a very deep, visceral level without us even knowing. And now we're creating these higher bandwidth forms of sensing. And I'm kind of curious, is there like an interesting analogy here where, you know, many folks got their DNA sequenced over the past decade or two without really thinking about a scenario where, you know, maybe a data breach would occur. And it made me wonder, from like a medical data perspective, what are going to be the effects of increasing brain and neurological health transparency without adequate privacy regulations? And obviously, America is very unique in that there is no federal law on internet privacy. Could this medical data kind of be weaponized against users?
Yeah, I mean, I think very much so. So, you know, part of it is people went into direct-to-consumer genetic testing and could never have imagined it would eventually be used to solve cold cases and to, you know, for law enforcement agencies to collect all of that data and put us all into warrantless searches for here on out, right? And then some people are like, well, that's okay. I don't mind that. Like, I didn't commit a crime, and so if it helps, you know, find that person, that's great. But as you start to imagine every possible use case, there are so many use cases that people just don't even contemplate about the ways in which data can be used or misused against them. I think with brain data, it's even more fundamental than that. Like, I don't think it's just let's point to how law enforcement might use it one day or how others might use it one day. I think it's about the importance of having a space like the inner sanctum, the mental privacy, the space we need to even just be us. And that's almost impossible for us to even grapple with or imagine a world in which we don't have that. But that's where I spend a lot of my mental energy, is imagining that world where we don't have that. And, think about, like, as a kid, all of the thoughts where you're like, maybe I'm weird. I have different gender identity or preferences and sexual orientation, or, maybe I don't want to be a doctor and my parents really want me to be a doctor. And all of these little thoughts that you have every day, if you don't have a space where you can do that, where you feel safe to just be that person that figures out who you are, what does that world look like for humans to become, right? This like act of becoming that we're constantly engaged in. That's the world that I think we're entering into without realizing it. It's a world where what we've taken for granted is this most fundamental aspect of being human that suddenly may no longer exist. And we're not putting into place the right protections to ensure this linchpin of humanity is still safe.
This is what it has come to. We're talking about neurosurveillance. Let's go even further down the rabbit hole and imagine this future a bit more. Do you think we'll get to a place where our brain states, our inner thoughts are fully transparent to one another? How would this impact our personal relationships? How's this going to impact society? It kind of feels like Twitter on steroids, like without the crude thumb typing to express your thoughts. Just knowing what everyone is thinking at all times just feels wild.
So I taught a class at Duke called Let's Talk About Digital You. And it was a class for undergraduates where the goal was to have them think critically about digital technologies and how they interact with them, then also think about what does it mean for them and who they are as a person. And one of the things I learned in that class when we were talking about privacy was how almost every kid in the class shared their location data on their phone with every one of their friends, like hundreds of friends who were tracking them at all times. I was shocked by this. And then I think about how in the writing of the book, I was interviewing this person who leads a meditation class that uses neural devices, and how they've created Facebook groups where they're sharing readouts of their meditation sessions. They're like, oh, look at my gamma activity there, or look at what's happening with my alpha activity here. And I think, is this going to be the latest status update where, you're like, Nita's in a bad mood, don't talk to her right now. Or like, Nita is thinking about food and my friends reach out and say like, hey, I'm thinking about food too. Like, let's go get a bite to eat. Like it just becomes something that, we decide like we're going to share all this data with. And it's not hard to imagine that we get to that place where it becomes something that is much more transparent. Is that all bad? I don't know, right? There are some people who believe total transparency is better. I can buy into that argument up until you get to mental privacy. And then I really think this act of becoming requires that we have much greater control over what, if anything, is shared from our brain data.
You're bringing up a point about this technology that is very much a consent issue. And sometimes I feel like utility with technology almost ends up being a Trojan horse. Like, we do get a lot of benefit from this stuff, but by consenting to these things, all these other things happen that we did not expect and we may not even be aware of.
Right. And I think that's what I'm trying to really highlight for people. There's been a lot that's happened over the past year, and part of it has been me worrying about normalizing neural surveillance, like the risks become invisible to us and we accept this new technology without even stopping to recognize all of the implications of what it is that we're adopting. And part of it is interesting. It's how the technology is introduced to us. A lot of times it's with, as you put it, utility, right? There's some utility that we buy into, or there's some experience where it's like, the only way you get this like fun experience is by opting into this new technology without then sensitizing us to all of the risks of doing so and really contemplating like, we're crossing a new barrier here. We're crossing some threshold that we've never passed before, and it has profound implications. It is this space of what it means to be human. Part of how we define vulnerability and intimacy with each other is what we choose to share and what we choose to hold back. And I don't think that's just a consent issue, right? Because like at some point there's enough peer pressure and social pressure that like if you're not sharing your location data, like you're weird, why aren't you sharing it with everybody else? So there's this coercive pressure toward the norm where we have this collective action problem. If each of us individually decides like, oh, I'm okay with sharing my neural data and I don't care if I don't have mental privacy, I don't have anything to hide, suddenly we have the collective having not recognized that they've given up this space of what it means to be human without us ever having really talked about it, thought about it, recognized how profound it is of a thing to actually cede to other people or to companies.
Yeah, it's like we like targeted ads. Oh, it's fine. I like using Instagram. And these algorithms have the coarsest, kind of view into our hopes, wishes, and desires, and are still doing such a great job. It feels like we're going into this future where people are like, oh yeah, I'll get that cheap Alexa, and then suddenly they're having dreams about Bud Light or Coors Light or whatever, but they're like, oh, that's cool with me. Like I'm asleep. I don't really care.
Yeah. I mean, that example is a real one, right?
Yeah.
It's like, I write about this in my book where, Coors was really frustrated. They'd been locked out of the halftime show for years for the Super Bowl. So they got together with dream researchers, figured out that it's possible to incubate in people's minds when they're in their most suggestible state because their conscious brain is basically checked out as they're falling asleep, associations between Coors and mountains and lakes and streams, and so that you have this idea that Coors is crisp and refreshing. But then I imagine this dystopian future of you're wearing your sleep earbuds to track your sleep activity. The entire economic, system of these companies is based on targeted advertisement and real-time bidding of, here's new real estate to be able to access Nita, whether she's on her search engine or the App Store. And it's like, hey, we've never targeted when Nita's asleep, but here's her most suggestible sleep state. She's got a Amazon Echo in her bedroom, prime time to advertise and to play a little jingle is right now. And so what stops that? What prevents targeted advertisements to us while we are sleeping? Nothing, right? I mean, other than the company shouldn't do that. Okay, what's going to stop them from doing that if that becomes the most effective way to advertise to us and becomes the most expensive ad real estate that they could sell to ad brokers?
Oh, good Lord. Oh, good Lord. I mean, this study is basically this targeted dream incubation demonstrates what companies and social media algorithms can do and also what neurotechnology is capable of already.
Right.
And so it's wild because social algorithms not only extract or infer our way of looking at the world, but they are actively shaping how we perceive the world.
That's right.
They predict what we want, but as these platforms become such an intricate part of our lives, they can almost define what we want. So when it comes to this threat of neurosurveillance, how do you think the rise of this tech could influence what we feel safe to think on a conscious level, or even more subliminally, what we're capable of thinking?
That's the question I struggle with the most these days is, as I try to unpack, what does self-determination mean anymore in a world where we're being steered constantly? And, the easiest way people can really understand that is if you sit down to watch a single episode of a show and you end up watching 4, it's by design, you are less likely to get up and leave if it's just automatic, if you don't have to make a self-control choice. And we can see these differences. If you look at the studies, there's a difference between when you are making a choice about what video to watch next versus an algorithm is deciding for you what video to watch next, in that the parts of your brain that are responsible for self-control are basically just turned off. They're silent when you're just being fed content over and over again.
Wow.
And when you see that, right, self-control is turned off, you are being fed information, and that's changing how you feel. That's changing what you believe. We are being steered. And is there such a thing as self-determination in a world that's increasingly connected to technology, and a world where that steering will become much, much more precise. If it's not just the crude interpretation of how many seconds or milliseconds you spent on a video to try to make an interpretation of you, but literally a direct measurement of your reaction to information. And then you're in an immersive environment. You're not even in the real world anymore, where at least there's some things that are static, and that immersive environment can continuously change in response to your brain activity. It feels like we're approaching the Matrix pretty quickly. And so then I struggle with okay, well, is there such a thing as self-determination in that world, of self-actualization in the world, where there's true autonomy, even if it's relational autonomy, where there's true competence, where we're exercising self-control and critical thinking skills, where we're fostering relationships with each other and relatedness with ourselves and with other people? I still believe there is. I think if we have cognitive liberty as a guiding principle, that points us to different ways of designing technology that align with self-determination rather than align with human diminishment.
I love the phrasing that you're using of technology is steering us. And really the question is, who is at the steering wheel, right? Who controls the objective function? And so this future starts sounding rather scary. So I want to zoom back out just a bit here and ask you, you've been a major figure in both spreading awareness about these breaches of cognitive liberty and trying to prepare us for the threats ahead. You've also been working to encode cognitive liberty as a legal right. I'm curious, what would that look like in regulation, and how would it be enforced?
First, I'll just emphasize, I think cognitive liberty, to your point, it's systemic change, right? It's in part about encoding it into law, but it's also about changing our incentives, changing, economic alignment with cognitive liberty, commercial design and redesign. From a legal perspective, I think it starts with a human rights approach. And this is so that there's a universal global norm around a right to cognitive liberty, and recognizing that as an organizing principle for how we interpret existing human rights law. It's recognizing privacy includes a right explicitly to mental privacy, which also safeguards from interference and interception with the automatic processes in our brain. And so much of this technology is really about that. It's not about robust thought. It's about these automatic ways that our brain reacts, and interfering with them, hijacking them, manipulating them. And then there's freedom of thought. As long as it's been a right, it has been recognized as an absolute human right. But it's pretty narrowly constructed because it's an absolute right. And so that's really around protecting the interception, manipulation, and punishment of thought. And here we're really in the mind reading realm, right? Which is protecting this space of, what we would really commonly in common language think of as thought and images in our mind. That's the human rights perspective. Any good critic of human rights law will say, well, that's only as good as whether people adhere to it and how it's implemented at a national level. So I also think it's important to recognize what that looks like, at nation state levels. And part of that is doing things as part of privacy laws to, create robust rights around cognitive biometric data. Employees have a right to mental privacy. Giving children and students in the educational system a right to not be surveilled for their mental activity, and giving them that space, right? So it's taking these high principles and then context by context, creating robust laws that actually implement those high concepts into law at different, nation and nation state levels.
So where are we currently at there? I'm curious if there's been any notable progress on this subject since your book came out.
A lot. Yeah. So in the US, there's been finally some momentum. I'd say I'm not that excited about what's happened here yet, but I'm appreciative of the fact that there have been conversations. So Colorado passed a new law that provides some protections around neural data when it's used for identification purposes. That's a very narrow subset, but it's something. California has a broader law that's currently pending that would make it a sensitive category of data. The Uniform Law Commission here in the United States, which has appointed commissioners from every state, has just agreed to create a study committee that might lead to a drafting committee to have model legislation for all of the states about how to protect this category of data around cognitive biometrics, which is exciting. that launches this summer. UNESCO has had a major process underway. 194 member countries voted to move toward adopting a global standard around the ethics of neurotechnology. The first draft of that was published in April. I'm part of that process, so I was appointed by the U.S. to that process and the co-chair of the expert committee. And the second draft will come out at the end of August. And then internationally, there's been a lot of conversations happening around this, the concept of cognitive liberty, the concept of, whether or not there need to be special rights, broadening the conversation beyond neurotechnology to understand this is a new class is moving forward. So it's encouraging, but what you find is trying to claw back rights is much harder than from the get-go having a set of rights in place. So I think we need to move faster and use that momentum to actually lead to real change before these products are wide scale across society.
This technology is coming fast and furious. And as you've alluded to, and actually as you've outlined, it's being infused into tech that we use every single day. People are just going to go buy the next gen AirPods. One question I have is for the listeners that are perhaps being exposed to this idea of neurosurveillance and neurotechnology. What advice would you have for them as they go about, navigating the world and become exposed to these technologies, both in their personal life, but also in the workplace?
We still have time to make choices individually and collectively. We should demand that if Apple launches EEG sensors, that they be very clear about what their data privacy policies are with respect to that data. And they've done that with Apple Provision, right? They've said, they've been incredibly specific to say, here's what's happening with the eye tracking data. Here's what lives on device. Here's are the inferences that leave the device. That kind of transparency is great, and I applaud them for doing that. We should only buy the products that are both transparent with respect to how they're thinking about each stream of sensor data, and not buy products from companies that do not offer those same assurances. That's a space we have a right to protect and that we should demand as a set of protections. And so advocate for the rights that, are being called for. Be part of the process of advocating for UNESCO to move forward with this process, for states, for countries to move forward with a robust set of rights around cognitive liberty, and be part of the change that makes that happen.
That's beautifully put. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
This tech is amazing, and it's not hyperbole to say that we're dealing with mind reading here. One of the central benefits of this technology is gaining visibility into our own minds, quantifying that endless stream of activity that really influences our day-to-day perception. And through this new tech, what seems to be as opaque as emotional experiences can be translated into measurable neurobiological patterns. This means that we can better understand what's happening in our heads. And it also means that we can more easily change what's happening in our heads. If you understand what's going on in a person's mind, you can create a stimulus to influence it. Whether that's Orwellian workplace monitoring or the most persuasive advertisement you've ever seen, it's giving away read-write access to the core of who we are. So what happens to a society where there are no secrets? We're all open books. Maybe this is an inevitable transition. We already share so much of ourselves via social media and do so proactively. That said, we need to place a lot more value in our personal data that we currently view to be innocuous and often sign away without even thinking about it. But when it comes to tech that has both read and write access into our minds, we have to be more proactive than we have been about social media. And we have to value the data before it becomes table stakes to function in society. After all, the stakes here are high. We're talking about our hearts, minds, and how we view the world. The TED AI Show is a part of the TED Audio Collective and is produced by TED with Cosmic Standard. Our producers are Ella Fetter and Sarah McCrae. Our editors are Ben Cheng and Alejandra Salazar. Our showrunner is Ivana Tucker, and our associate producer is Ben Montoya. Our engineer is Asia Pilar-Simpson. Our technical director is Jacob Winnick, and our executive producer is Eliza Smith. Our fact checker is Christiana Parta, and I'm your host, Bilawal Sidhu. See y'all in the next one.